You know how sometimes when you're writing, suddenly you remember a rule from like way back
Yeah,
and it
yeah.
completely throws you off?
Totally, yeah.
Like, can you even start a sentence with because? Did anyone else learn that one?
Oh, it's like those grammar gremlins, right?
Exactly. They just pop up out of nowhere. So today we are going on a deep dive and we are banishing those grammar gremlins for good.
Sounds like a plan.
We are talking about grammar myths. We're going deep. We've got articles. Oh, we've got articles from Harvard linguist Steven Pinker. We've got stuff from the grammar girl herself. We've
Ooh,
got the savvy red pen. And of course, no deep dive would be complete without consulting the Holy Grail.
I have it.
Wikipedia.
It's amazing how much information is packed into these sources.
Hmm.
And one thing that really comes through is how much language is constantly evolving. Like those strict rules that we learned in school, they might not be so set in stone after all.
Well, let's put some of those rules on trial then. How about that one about never starting a sentence with a conjunction?
Oh, the dreaded conjunction at the beginning of a sentence. It's a myth. It's a misconception that's been passed down through generations of classrooms.
Generation.
But the reality is, starting a sentence with and, but, even because,
Mhm.
it can actually be a really effective way to add emphasis or to control the rhythm of what you're writing.
Yeah, and it's not just a stylistic choice either. The
Yeah.
Savvy Red Pen article, they actually did some analysis, and they found that something like 10% of sentences in like top-tier published writing
Wow.
begin with conjunctions.
That's a significant chunk.
It's a lot, right?
Yeah, it really highlights that breaking this so-called rule can make your writing more sophisticated, more engaging. Because when you think about it, when you use a conjunction at the beginning of a sentence, you're shining a spotlight on that connection, right? The one between that sentence and the one before it.
It's like this very intentional pause for emphasis.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm sold.
All right.
So we can start sentences with conjunctions,
Yeah.
but while we're on the topic of conjunctions,
Yes.
let's go for the big one because I feel like that was, if there was one rule that was really drilled into my brain in school, that was it. Never start a sentence with because.
And yet,
And yet.
the Cambridge Dictionary actually points out that starting a sentence with because can be a very powerful way to emphasize that cause and effect relationship between two ideas. The important thing, the key here, is to make sure that that because clause is part of a complete sentence,
Okay,
not just a fragment hanging out on its own.
gotcha. So it's not so much about avoiding because altogether. It's about being conscious of the structure
Yes.
and using it deliberately.
Exactly. I mean, think about Emily Dickinson's line, because I could not stop for death. He kindly stopped for me.
Right, wow.
It's a powerful opening. It immediately grabs your attention, and it sets the tone for the entire poem.
And it makes you think about the rules in a different way.
Right.
Because obviously she's Emily Dickinson. Like,
But
she
yes.
knows what she's doing.
Yeah, she can handle because.
Right, she can handle it. Okay, so maybe this is a case where, again, it's a good intention, like we want people to write clearly and concisely. But when you take that to the extreme, it kind of,
It can backfire.
it backfires and it makes your writing sound like really stiff and unnatural.
Absolutely.
Okay, so because is back in the game.
Because it's back.
What about this one?
Yeah.
Ending a sentence with a preposition? I can practically hear my English teacher cringing right now.
I know. It's like nails on a chalkboard for some people.
Right.
But it's another one of those rules that, it sounds very official,
Mm-hmm.
but it lacks any real grammatical basis.
Yeah.
In fact, the Chicago Manual of Style, which is, like the authority on grammar and style,
The Bible?
exactly, they actually call it an unnecessary restriction.
Really?
Yeah. And you know who else thought this rule was ridiculous?
Who's that?
Winston Churchill. He famously mocked this rule, and he said, "This is the kind of errant pedantry up with which I shall not put."
Okay, so it's a mouthful,
It is a mouthful.
but it makes the point.
It does make the point very clear.
Okay, so Winston Churchill, on our side.
On our side.
I like it.
Yep.
So sometimes ending with a preposition is the best way, the clearest way to say something.
It's the most natural way. It's often the most elegant way.
Okay, I'm convinced prepositions are free. They can go wherever they want.
They are liberated.
Okay, good. Now what about this one? Because this is one where I will get tripped up. Splitting infinitives. To split or not to split? That is the question.
I say split away.
Really?
Feel free to boldly split those infinitives.
Yeah.
Just like boldly going where no one has gone before. Splitting an infinitive is perfectly acceptable. In fact, sometimes it can make your writing clearer and more impactful.
Speaking of boldly going,
Yeah.
there's this article from Briefcatch, and they talk about this really interesting historical tidbit
Okay.
about the whole, like, aversion to splitting infinitives.
Uh-huh.
It might actually stem from this, like, fear of splitting any verb phrase.
Oh, interesting.
So it wasn't even just about infinitives.
Right, like a general anxiety about splitting verbs.
Yeah. So instead of saying, like, I will happily accept this award, you'd have to say, I will accept this award happily.
Exactly, exactly. And it just ends up sounding a bit clunky, doesn't it?
Sounky.
Yeah, they took this, like, reasonable guideline about aiming for clarity and conciseness, but they applied it so rigidly
Yeah.
that it kind of backfired.
Yeah. And thankfully, Chicago Manual of Style to the rescue, because they set us straight. They're like, no, actually, you can put an adverb between the auxiliary verb and the main verb.
Yeah, it's often even preferable, you know? It just sounds more natural.
More natural.
Like, why make things harder than they need to be, right?
Exactly. Just let those adverbs flow.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered starting sentences with conjunctions, ending them with prepositions, splitting infinitives.
It's a lot.
I feel like we're, like, on a roll here, busting myths.
We are on a roll. What's next?
Okay, how about the singular they?
Oh, yeah.
Because it feels like that's been a big topic of, like, grammar debate lately.
It has been a hot topic, and rightfully so. Because this is one where language is evolving right before our eyes. And it really reflects, this growing awareness of gender identity and inclusivity. And so using they as a singular pronoun when we don't know someone's gender, it's becoming so much more common and accepted, thankfully.
Yeah, it was definitely a lot more elegant than that whole, like, he or she thing.
Oh, yes. So clunky.
Which can get really clunky really fast.
It can. And it avoids making assumptions, which is always a good thing, right?
Right?
Even the Chicago Manual of Style, which tends to be pretty traditional, even they acknowledge the use of the singular they in those contexts now.
I love that. It's like language can actually change and adapt
They can't.
to, like, our evolving understanding of the world, you know?
I love that.
It's not this fixed thing. Okay, so we've tackled those. Let's see, what else? We've got to keep going. We're on a roll.
Okay, right.
What about this one? 5-sentence paragraphs. Myth or reality?
Oh, the 5-sentence paragraph. That takes me back to, like, elementary school.
I know, right?
Where it was, like, drilled into us.
Yes.
But guess what? It's a myth.
It is.
It is a total myth.
Yeah.
Professional writers, they use paragraphs of all shapes and sizes.
Really?
Sometimes a single sentence can be a paragraph.
Wait, it's true. Hold on. So those times when I do a 1-sentence paragraph?
Yes.
That's not wrong.
Not at all. In fact, the Oxford Guide to Plain English, they actually are very clear about this, that sometimes a single sentence is all you need to make your point.
So it's more about the flow of ideas.
Exactly. It's about the logical separation of thoughts.
Okay, so as long as you're being clear
Exactly.
and you're, like, guiding the reader through your thinking, a
Exactly.
1-sentence paragraph
It has its place.
is totally legit.
Okay.
It is totally legit.
I love this. So many rules. Out the window.
Out the window. We've got more. We've got more myths to bust.
Wait, let's do it.
All right. What about contractions? Are they too informal for writing?
Okay, so like can't, shouldn't, wouldn't.
All of those.
They're telling me those are okay to use in our writing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Contractions, they add that conversational tone.
Yeah.
They can make your writing more concise, more engaging. Now, of course, if you're writing, a very formal academic paper,
Right.
you might want to stick to the more formal versions. But in most cases, contractions are totally fine.
I can't believe it.
Believe it. So Shakespeare was using contractions,
Exactly.
and I'm getting marked down.
When you're getting marked down. It just goes to show it's all about context.
Context is key.
Context is everything.
Yeah.
Using contractions can make your writing, again, it's about that connection with the reader, making it more relatable,
Right.
less stilted, and again, finding that right balance for your audience and your purpose.
Okay. I'm on board with contractions. Contractions are back.
Contractions are back.
Another myth busted. Okay, what about this one? Because this is one I hear a lot. The passive voice is, like, enemy number one in the writing world.
Right.
True or false?
Oh, the passive voice. It gets such a bad rap, doesn't it?
It really does.
Like, public enemy number one for grammar sticklers everywhere. But again, I think this is a case where context is key. And while it's true that the active voice, it often packs a stronger punch, it creates more immediacy.
Right.
There are times when the passive voice can be a really valuable tool.
So it's not about, like, banishing it completely.
Exactly.
It's about knowing when to use it.
Yeah, like imagine you're writing a mystery novel
Okay.
and you want to build suspense around a certain action, right? So instead of saying someone flicked off the lights, you could say the lights were flicked off.
Whoa.
And suddenly you don't know who did it, right?
Okay.
It adds that element of mystery.
Yeah, you're like hiding the actor,
Exactly.
which is perfect for a mystery.
Exactly. Or think about like a news report where you really want to emphasize the impact of an event, right? So instead of saying the city council passed a new law, you could say a new law was passed by the city council.
Oh, interesting. So you're kind of like shifting the focus onto the law itself instead of like who did it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, that's really interesting. So it seems like the theme of today is we don't need to be afraid of these like so-called grammar rules.
Right.
It's more about understanding the nuances
Yeah. And knowing how to use them effectively.
and how to use them to make your writing better.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, language is a tool, right?
Mhm.
And like any tool, it has different uses.
I like that.
It's about choosing the right tool for the job. And sometimes that means breaking the so-called rules.
This has been so eye-opening.
It's been fun.
Because I feel like for so long, I, and I mean, a lot of our listeners too, have had this very like rigid,
Right.
almost like fearful approach
Yes.
to grammar.
It can feel very, very strict and unforgiving, can't it?
It can, and it's so freeing to realize
Yes.
that it's not, and that it's more about, like you said, language being this tool,
Exactly.
this living, breathing thing that we can use.
And that's the beauty of it, right? It's constantly evolving.
Yes.
It changes with us, and I think that's really exciting.
Well, this has been fantastic. Any last words of wisdom for our listeners?
Yeah, I would just say don't be afraid to experiment, to play with language, find your own voice, and write with confidence.
Write with confidence. I love that. This has been fantastic. I feel like my grammar gremlins they've like packed their bags and left.
That's what we like to hear.
I know, it's amazing. Well, until next time, everyone, happy writing.
Happy writing.